Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. Um, as you can see, I'm not in my regular spot. I also don't have a microphone, so I don't have the clearest, the clearest sound. But I hope you'll hear well enough. Hold on one second. Why did I go dark over here? Why is this screensaver closing? Let me make sure that does not happen here. Just give me 1 second here. That should not happen. Let's hope it doesn't happen. Okay. So I didn't want to miss a share. I'm out of town, but I wanted to share this. I really wanted to share this with you already last week, but whatever. We had a campaign, and we were very busy at the beginning of the week, and it was very hard to give it the right thought, the right concentration. So we're going to do this now, and I hope this class will be very meaningful to you. I'm very excited. I started a new podcast, and you can watch it on YouTube as well. Not watch it, it's just audio. It's a half an hour class every single day, and it's in this very special book called Tafresh Ayin Beis. Okay? So this is one volume. These books are now printed, I think, in 5 volumes. What is it? It's the most explicit revelation of divinity, of godliness, and explained in a way that has never been before. It's the most thorough piece, the most thorough discussion on the entire realm of godliness and the divine, the nature of existence, that has ever been delivered. There is the 5th Chabad Rebbe, Reb Sholem Dov Ber of Lubavitch, who passed away in 1920. Not exactly sure right now the year that he was born. The Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Chabad Rebbe, was the successor of four generations before him of great Hasidic masters who had brought to the world incredible knowledge, divine knowledge, especially the time that we're learning about this. I don't know why my screensaver keeps on going on, which is no good. I mean, everything is good on a deeper level. I'm with my phone over here and I can't figure out how to stop it. Okay, I have to keep on tapping it, which is annoying me. In any case, I hope we're going to be able to work this out. Maybe I'll just keep my finger over here. In any case, the Rebbe, okay, so the reason I really want to talk about this is because we're going to receive the Torah Be'ezrat Hashem. Next week is the holiday of Shavuot, which is the holiday of the giving of the Torah. And we know that God continuously gives the Torah, Nosein HaTorah. And the ultimate Nosein means is the blessing that we say that God is in a continuous, perpetual state of delivering the Torah to us. And his ultimate revelation of the Torah is going to be in the days of Mashiach. So that means that until Mashiach comes, the Torah, and then hence onward as well, the Torah keeps on getting deeper and deeper and deeper. It opens up and it reveals its hidden mysteries. And that comes through a series of revelations that are delivered throughout the generations. So the great, incredible, godly revelation to the world at a certain point was the revelation of the Zohar, which although Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, we just celebrated Lag BaOmer, was lived close to 2,000 years ago, his book was hidden from the world. Even after he said it, he recorded it and transmitted it, and it was written down by his students. It was hidden, and obviously God didn't want it to be revealed for about 800-900 years, and it was only revealed around in the 1200s. In the 12th century, I think, in the 1100s, by Moshe de Leon, Rabbi Moshe de Leon, he discovered this manuscript. And today we are absolutely certain that that is teachings of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. And then came a further revelation of the great saintly Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, Isaac Luria, the Holy Ari, who completely revolutionized Kabbalah and brought it to a whole new level. Then came 200 years after the Ari, came the Holy Baal Shem Tov in the seventh, who began revealing himself in the around 1730, and he revealed even higher secrets that were revealed before him, brought forth the soul of the esoteric and inside of the Torah. Then came all the other Hasidic masters. Most prominent amongst them, third generation Hasidic master, Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi, author of Chabad Hasidism, who began in a unique manner to explain these mystical godly concepts in a way that no one before him managed to do. He was able to take it and translate it into a language that the human mind can comprehend and understand these pure divinity, these Kabbalistic concepts that earlier were spoken just in cryptic Kabbalistic language that you needed to relate to only with your soul, like in a more transcendental way, as an experience, but not as an intellectual, not as a conception of the mind. Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi began feeding Hasidism, feeding the mystical, feeding the godly into the human mind, into the human comprehension. He began, his son, the Mittler Rebbe, the next generation, expanded tremendously on his father's teachings. Anybody that knows about the Mittler Rebbe, second Chabad Rebbe. And then came the third Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, the fourth Rebbe, the Rebbe Shmuel. Finally, we come to the fifth generation. This is the book that we're going to be studying now. Now, I just had this interesting thought that it could be the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Rebbe, had such a incredible furtherance, advance in Hasidic teachings. He was known, the fifth Chabad Rebbe was referred to by Hasidim as the Rambam of Hasidus, as Maimonides of the Hasidic doctrine. And that is because, just like Maimonides was the most organized of people, and he was able to take the entire Torah and filter it through his incredible lens and bring it down into a very structured form. Maimonides was the one who structured the Torah in a way that no one managed to do before him. So too, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab, was so structured in his teaching, and he was able to codify Hasidus, so to speak, in such a clear, concise manner in his writings and his books. Over the years, we studied some of the discourses, but I never really delved deeply and shared with the online audience any of his more lengthy Hemshechim, which means Hasidic discourses, in which he strings together many discourses. He was really the originator. His father was the one who began that concept, to teach not just one isolated discourse, but to teach a string of discourses where one picks up, one starts off where the other one ended. So you can develop an idea much in a far more thorough way, as opposed to the way Hasidism was delivered before, was that on each holiday or Shabbos or so on and so forth, they were delivered as independent, individual teachings. Of course, the more you studied and the more you learned, you were able to access and understand each one better, but they weren't necessarily following a very systematic order. But the fourth Chabad Rebbe, Reb Shmuel, began doing that. His son, the Rebbe Rashab, took it to a whole new level. One of the primary reasons he was able to do that was because he established a yeshiva, a Hasidic school, which a study hall. Until that time, there was no particular yeshiva studying Hasidism. Hasidism was something that the Hasidim would come, and the Rebbe would say, the master would say a teaching, they would study it. And the yeshivas where people would only study the revealed part of the Torah. They wouldn't study the esoteric hidden writings of the Torah. The fifth Chabad Rebbe innovated that he started a Lubavitch yeshiva. It was called Hemshech Tmimim. He was the one who initiated that yeshiva in 1887. And when he started Tomchei Temimim, the boys, the yeshiva boys, would study Torah like about, I think, like 12 hours a day. 4 of those hours, 8 of them were devoted to Talmudic study, which is the exoteric part of the Torah. And 4 hours, that's a huge chunk of time, 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours at night, was devoted for deep Hasidic study of Hasidism, which is all this Kabbalistic and deep comprehension of the divine. So once he had a school with many brilliant students who were studying this all the time, he had the right vessels, he had the right container, so to speak. He had someone to speak to, and he can deliver Hasidism on a more advanced fashion than even his predecessors. Now, and for that reason, it's interesting. Now, I want to just add my own possible little innovation over here. That just like Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, who took mysticism, before Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, there were many mystical teachers, many great rabbis, Reb Nechunya ben Akana, and Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, and various other great, even Rabbi Eliezer was a great mystic, the Rebbe of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was a mystic. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was someone who had incredible knowledge in the esoteric, as we say, that he didn't leave even one thing that he didn't study, big things and small things. And the sages say the big things means the work of the chariot. That means the whole, divine realm. So these rabbis were incredible great mystics. Yet Reb Shimon Bar Yochai takes the cake because he takes it to a whole new level. He's like the ultimate master of mysticism. Why? So it's interesting. And when did he reveal it? On Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer, we know, is the 33rd day of the Omer, which we celebrated about last week, a week ago Sunday. And we know that is in the 5th week of the Omer count, which corresponds to the attribute of Hod. And Lag BaOmer itself is the 5th day of the 5th week. So it comes out to be the Hod of the Hod, glory of glory. And it is explained in Chassidus why, when we reach that day, I'm not going to go into it right now. It has to do with the fact that we've purified the emotions to the lowest point, because the emotions that follow glory of glory, the Yesod element and the Malchut element, are considered already more external. They're not so much the inner world of the human. They're more the external aspect of the human being. Therefore, in terms of personal rectification, when we rectify ourselves down to the Hod Sheba Hod, we've completed our rectification. And as a result of that, we are ready for the Torah. We're ready for very high revelation. And that's the reason why Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, that's the day that he passed away. And that's the day that he had the greatest revelations from above and the greatest transmissions into the world. Hod Sheba Hod. So it's interesting that the Rebbe Rashab, the 7 Chabad Rebbes, correspond to the 7 divine attributes. The 5th one, the author of this book that we just began, called, as it mentioned again, I refer to it as the Elokus podcast, the podcast of divinity. This book that we are studying, the Rebbe Rashab, he was the attribute, he corresponded and personified the attribute of Hod. So it could be, in that sense, is the reason why the Rebbe Rashab was the person out of all of the Chabad Rebbes that was able to bring down such advanced Hasidism to such a high level. So let me tell you the story a little bit about it. And in the end, I'd like to share with you a personal, exciting little thing that I think is so miraculous that happened to me personally in my choice, suddenly out of nowhere, to make this lifetime commitment, because to study these 5 books is probably going to take us years and years of study. It's vast. It is incredible. And why did I undertake it? It was like something inside of me. It was like pushing me to do it. But then I found out a beautiful and amazing secret. It wasn't known to me when I made the choice to teach it. It's after I made the commitment, I found a gem and a jewel that gave me such an inspiration. So let me tell you a little bit about where this discourse came about. how it began, how it started. So the story begins. The fourth Chabad Rebbe, Reb Shmuel, passed away. We did actually a class on him this year in this series called Lives of Tzaddikim. So during Sukkot, we had one of the first one this year, in which we speak about various different tzaddikim. We did one on Reb Shmuel, so you can listen about his life. Fascinating life. He passed away in 1884 in Yud Gimel Tishrei. His son, the next Rebbe, Reb Shalom, now he left. I think he had 3 sons, but one of them passed away young, and he left 2 sons. And the older one, known as the Raza, Reb Zalman Aaron, and the second one was Reb Shalom Dov Ber, the Rebbe known as the next Rebbe. Now it was the second one that assumed the mantle of Chabad leadership after his father, but he resisted it for 10 years. So from 1884 to 1894, the Chabad movement was without, or the Lubavitch branch of the Chabad movement. What some people don't know is that the Chabad movement, or the Chabad Hasidic group, had various different branches. Because the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, had 7 sons, in which 6 of them became successors of him. So the oldest one did not, but the younger 6, every single one of them opened up a branch of Chabad Hasidism. But those branches lasted 2 generations or so, and then they disappeared. Whoever was left of those branches joined the Lubavitch one. The Lubavitch was the Tzemach Tzedek himself, the third Rebbe, was the Rebbe in Lubavitch. Chabad's history. Now let me explain a little bit. The difference of saying Chabad and saying Lubavitch is as follows. Generally, people interchange them, they mean the same thing. But they don't mean the same thing. They refer to the same movement. Lubavitch is a name of a town in Russia, in White Russia. Chabad is a acronym for the 3 words Chachma, Bina, Das, which means wisdom, Bina, understanding, and Das means knowledge. So, and it refers to the style of Hasidism that differentiates it from the rest of the Hasidic movement. The rest of the Hasidic movement emphasized more the emotional elements, getting excited about God, serving God with fervor and passion, but it left out, to a very great degree, the mind. The mind's, the comprehension and understanding of godliness was only something that the greatest tzaddikim had access to. But the ordinary people were not given those teachings. In Chabad, it was different because the Chabad, Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi, opened up the school of Chabad, in which he felt that his main job as a Rebbe was to mentor the Hasidim by teaching them these very, very deep concepts, and that they should excite their heart with their own understanding of godliness. So it was a whole different school of thought, and that's the meaning of Chabad. Since the second generation, the Chabad teachers, the Chabad masters in the days of the Mittler Rebbe moved to a town called Lubavitch. So that's the reason why the branch is called Lubavitch. The third Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, had, as we said before, 7 sons. 6 of them became Rebbes in different towns. One in Liadi, one in Kapust, one in Niezhny, various different places where they became different. They opened up their own shop, their own branch, and they had hundreds and if not thousands of followers. The youngest one of them was Reb Shmuel, and he was his father's successor in his father's town in Lubavitch. Okay, so now we get what means Lubavitch. Good. So now, when the fourth Rebbe Shmuel, passed away, as we said before, in 1884, he passed away very young. He was early, I think 50, maybe 48, or I think that's what his age was, not even 50. When he passed away, His younger son, his second son, became Rebbe, but again, 10 years later. And I said earlier, in 1890, his father passed away in 1884. He officially became Rebbe in 1894. So the story of this particular discourse, which was like his prize, his crown jewel in terms of his contribution to Hasidism. Let me just, before we continue, just to show you how special it is. As we said before, what makes it unique is that it's the longest exploration, the most thorough exploration of the subject matters of godliness that there is in any book in the world. Philosophical Hasidism discussion, Kabbalistic. So it's like a blend. It's crazy. Now again, what's the style? The style is that it's what we call a Hemshech. It's a string of discourses. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the fourth Rebbe was the one who began saying string discourses. But the average length of a stringed discourse is 5 to 10 discourses. Now, some of them have 5, some of them have 6, some of them will have 7 discourses. That's already long. 8. And I think the Rebbe Marash said some discourses that might have been 15 to 20 discourses, all part of one subject. But that's, I think, the maximum, maybe 25. There's some long ones, Mayim Rabim, Hemshech V'Kacha. There's known ones of the Rebbe, but that's where he stayed. He stayed within that realm. His son, the fifth Rebbe, when he gave this discourse clocks in with 144 discourses as one long discourse. It's the 144. The second one, to be close to that, is one with 61 discourses. Okay, that was said a few years prior to this one. This one was said in 1912 till 1915. Took 3.5 years to say it. From June, Shavuos time, it started on the holiday of Shavuos, which probably was June, maybe late May or June 1912. It continued throughout the rest of 1912, 1913, 1914, into 1915, all the way to November, December, Pashas Vayera of 1915, so almost 1916. That's when, so it was close to 4 years. Not only that, when he finished delivering these discourses, he continued writing lengthy part of it and editing and hundreds of pages that he never said, which continued to elucidate the concepts. And that he continued until the time of his passing in 1920. So he really was busy with this for 8 years in the literal sense. However, if you trace it to its seeds, where did it really begin? It began much earlier. So in those years after his father passed away, before he assumed, again, from between 1884 and 1894, the Rebbe Rashab was he was to a certain degree leading the Hasidic group, but not in an official capacity. That gave him time with himself, which I guess he was feeling that he was preparing himself for his next stage in his life. I don't think he thought that he would forever be able to wiggle his way from his responsibility to be the Rebbe, but he pushed it off as much as he can. During that time, he was working very, very hard. He said to his son that in 1887, 5647, I diligently studied the most difficult, complex book of Hasidus up to that time, which was the book of the Imre Bina, a book authored by his great-grandfather. Sorry, not by his by his great-grandfather, the second Rebbe, known as the Mittler Rebbe, whose Hasidism was very, very, very deep and very long. But from all the books the Mittler Rebbe wrote, the Imre Bina is considered the deepest one, the hardest one to learn. So the Rebbe Rashab, his great grandson, said that in that year, in 1887, he toiled so difficult, with such exertion in Imre Bina. He said that my hair in my head were falling out from the intensity of my exertion. And he told his son that at that time was when he laid the foundations for the ideas, for the fundamental concepts that he was going to later explain in this discourse of 1912 called Pesha Shehekdimu, the one with the 144 discourses. So that's when he laid the foundation for it. 26 years before he began teaching it, he was already developing the concepts. Now, obviously, we don't even understand the brilliance of these people, their holiness, their godliness. And you realize that a lot of this has to do with brilliance, but a lot of it has also a lot to do with divine revelation. It's taking place at the same time. It's some kind of a marriage between the human mind, the godly mind of the godly soul, a Rebbe, especially a Rebbe's soul, which is the highest soul of the Jewish people. And at the same time, there is revelation coming from above, and deep contemplation and deep meditation and deep study and research from below. It created this incredible masterpiece. So again, in 1887, he's already contemplating. He's already beginning to forge the foundations of this, although he will not teach it for many, many years later. He couldn't have taught it anyways because there wasn't really much of a Hasidic group of people who would be able to digest it. In order to be able to deliver this, you need people that have already opened their minds in Hasidism. They have to be advanced students. At that time, in 1887, was still 10 years before he opened the yeshiva. So the Rebbe Rashab, so the previous Rebbe said in a talk, he says, my father, the previous Rebbe is the son of the Rebbe Rashab. His name is Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak. He's the sixth Rebbe, who passed away in 1950. So he says about his father that my father worked very hard when he became Rebbe. In 1894, when he became the official leader of the Chabad movement, he started saying deep discourses every Shabbos. But since there was no yeshiva, so they're considered relatively lighter concepts, easier concepts to understand. He said that for 3 years. During those 3 years, the ones that were studying them were young men who would spend a year in Lubavitch after they would get married. They would come to the Rebbe and stay there for a year to soak up Hasidism for an entire year. So these were the ones that were studying and learning it and were absorbing and taking it in, and they were the students, so to speak. In 1897 is when the Rebbe Rashab decided to open the yeshiva, as mentioned earlier. And during those years, he started deepening, his discourses started becoming far more advanced. You can see it. You try to learn those discourses, they're more difficult to learn. They take much more, exertion of the mind. You have to study, you have to contemplate, you have to think. And he continued advancing these teachings as he continued until 10 years later, in 1906, the Rebbe Rashab delivered that discourse that I told you has 61 discourses to it. And that took him over a year and a half, I think, or maybe close to 2 years to deliver it. And again, that was a tremendous advance in the Hasidic world. It's one of the most complex and richest discourses that there are, second to the one that we're talking about now, which was delivered a few years later. Now, the previous Rebbe relates as follows. In 1903, my father traveled to Vienna. That means the Rebbe Sholem Dov Ber, the Rebbe Rashab, traveled to Vienna. His trip to Vienna had to do with seeking out health, seeking medical help. He ended up, he stayed in Vienna for a nice couple of months. following under the guidance, under the instruction, under the care of various different doctors there. The previous Rebbe said that that winter was one of his most fortunate memories in his life, because he got to spend about 3 months with his father, in which he spent hours and hours with him, where his father would study with him, and his father would tell him stories and teach him. It was like, for him, it was literally blissful. This was his highest, most cherished time in his life. He was a young man at this time. His father was the Rebbe, and he spent with him. Now, he relates this following episode. He says, every night, every evening, my father and I would take a walk, and we would a lot of times frequent the shuls. That in Vienna, there were various different synagogues, there were shuls, and there were Hasidic shtiblach. Hasidic shtibel means a Hasidic shul. Hasidic shul usually is a little more lively. The decorum is a little bit lower than other places. It's not so stiff. Hasidim sit around. They have a drink of spirit. They sing. They dance. They eat, and they tell stories. It's a more of a casual. It's a little bit more of a casual setting than a traditional, more stiff type of, Ashkenazic, or you might say shul in Austria or in Germany, right? It was very, very different. So he would visit these Hasidic shuls. Now, these were not Chabad shuls. These were Hasidic shuls of the other branches of Hasidism. And the Rebbe Rashab loved going there and talking to the various different Hasidim. I don't even know if they knew who he was. And he would converse with them. He would talk to them. They would tell stories of their Hasidic masters. And the Rebbe would always listen and then debate and talk to them. It was very, very special. That's what they would do almost every day. They would have to go pray the afternoon services anyways. They would go there, hang out with the Hasidim. One day, my father told me, he says, tonight, this evening, we're not going to go. We're going to stay in our hotel, because I have a very deep Hasidic concept that I want to think about. I have an inyan in Hasidus that I want to think about. So today we're gonna skip our walk and our visit to the shul. So the previous Rebbe relates, this is what happened. It was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. My father sat down on the couch in the hotel. Now they had 2 rooms in the hotel, adjacent rooms with a door in between them. One was for the previous Rebbe, one was for his father. The door was open. He says, my father handed me a manuscript of Hasidus, I guess from either his own or from his father or whatever. And he said I should copy it. In other words, he gave me work to do. And at that time, he himself sat down on the couch in the hotel. He had 1 foot on the floor. 1 foot was raised up on the couch. He had a cigarette in between his fingers, like this. And this was at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I saw that he went into thinking, and I went into thought. I walked in a couple of times through the evening, and I looked at my father, and I realized that he's not here. He was there. His eyes were open. He's staring, but you can see that he's elsewhere. He just was not in the space. His mind was very, 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 very deep. He was in a meditation, in a place of such depth. And so the hours passed. I kept on coming in, checking in if he's okay. And again, I wouldn't bother him. Same exact position, didn't move. 1 foot on the floor, 1 foot on the couch. The cigarette was still in between the finger. I don't think it was even a lit cigarette. Maybe it was lit, but then it wasn't. And it was just sitting there like this. And the Rebbe was deep in thought. The next thing was 3:45, I think 3:15 in the morning, or maybe 3:45 a.m. was when the Rebbe stirred. My father stirred, and he sat up, took out his pocket watch, looked at the time. When he realized how much time passed, he stood up and he went to the window, looked, and said, "Oh, looks like it's time for the evening service." Now, the evening service usually is done way earlier. As soon as it gets dark, depending we're in the summer or winter, right? 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, you do the evening service. In the winter, you'll do it much earlier. Here, it was 3 in the morning when the Rebbe Rashab, 3:45 in the morning. It was still night, but he could still daven, and he prayed the evening service. He says, I realized that my father lost all sense of time and all sense of he didn't even know which day it was, because he said, I would study with my father every day a passage of Nachmanides. We had a shir, one of our studies. That, I guess they still studied it that day, that night after this. My father asked me, which part are we doing today? Now, they followed every day the portion of the Torah portion of the day. So why would the Rebbe Rashab have to ask him? Why would his father have to ask him? So the previous Rebbe says, I noticed from here that he doesn't want to ask me which day it is. So in order to camouflage that question, he's asking me where we're holding, what we're supposed to learn today. And thereby he's going to be able to deduce which day it was. That's how he left the entire realm of time and space. He was so removed from this world during that night of contemplation. Well, what was he thinking? Later, the Rebbe Rashab reveals again to the previous Rebbe that during that night, during that afternoon and evening of about, about 10 hours, 10 hours or 11 hours of deep thought is when he was carving out the ideas. Again, he started 16 years earlier, but he really, really advanced the concepts of this discourse during that moment in Vienna. Now, that's the way it is. Okay. Now, fast forward. That happened in 1903. In 1912, in the early winter, I think after the holidays, after the high holidays, the Rebbe Rashab at this time left Russia and he traveled to France. He needed it for his health. He went to a resort town in France that is on the coast of France, not too far from the border of France and Italy. It's called Menton. I Googled it. I looked it up. Looks like a very, very pretty town. He went there for the entire winter. And his son, the previous Rebbe, said, I accompanied my father from Russia to Warsaw. And I guess, I don't know if he continued on to Menton with his father. I think he left and went back. But he until Warsaw, and then from Warsaw, his father would, I guess, connect with a train to France. So on the train, my father told me that he's very excited about his upcoming trip because he feels that in the peace and tranquility that he's going to have in that resort town in France, he's going to be able to delve deeply into a new idea in Hasidus, in Hasidism. So the previous Rebbe, said, I was very curious. What is my father? What's this new breakthrough in Hasidism my father is so excited about? And I was so curious. But, certain things you just don't know. He says a few months, like a little while into it, maybe a month and a half or so into the time that my father was there, I received a letter from him in which he's telling me in that letter how excited he is that he was able to make such headway in this new, it's developing. He says, I was able to already put down the main points, although it's very concise and very, very concentrated, but I feel like I've broken through. I feel like I've gotten out what I needed to get out and to develop it to a point that it's already organized in an organized fashion. He then later related that on Purim, so this is the whole winter, the Rebbe Rashab is there. On Purim, the previous Rebbe was together with his father in Menton. He went to visit his father in France. There was a Fabrengen there where the Rebbe A few other Hasidim from Russia traveled to France to be with the Rebbe on Purim. And during Purim, there was a Farbrengen. Farbrengen means a gathering where the Rebbe would share thoughts and ideas and inspiration. During that Farbrengen, my father was talking about the incredible delight of a person who's able to lose himself in deep intellectual thought, in deep, especially if it's godly thinking. And he was discussing what it means to really, really toil. He was saying business people who toil in their business and sometimes lose a night's sleep because they're so engrossed in whatever business, whatever they're so occupied that they don't get a chance to sleep, or they experience enormous stress because various different things, there are obstacles and so on and so forth. He says, it doesn't come close to the amount of stress you feel and the amount of toil. You can't even compare it to the toil of it, because he was talking at that Farbrengen to great Hasidim that were business people. And he was telling them that you can't even, they were great scholars as well, but they also ran businesses. He's telling you there's no way you can compare the two of what it means to really toil. And when you don't understand something, how you can stress over it and make you crazy. But then finally, when you break through and you have that revelation and that clarity, it opens up your mind. He says the pleasure is indescribable. The satisfaction is indescribable. He says, and he compares it when you conceive and understand concepts and understand ideas. It's like looking at this most incredible painting, gazing, and you're looking at the painting and you notice all the nuances of it. And you're so transfixed in looking at this painting, you can't tear your eyes away. So, and he says, but even more so when you have this visualization in the mind's eye view and understanding concepts. He says you can reach a state of klos hanefesh. Klos hanefesh means you can actually come to a place where you might expire from delight and pleasure. Literally, your soul will leave your body because the pleasure is too intense. So the previous Rebbe was saying that in the Hasidim there, they didn't even realize what he was referring to. That this was his experiences that he just had gone through in the last few months when he was laying and developing this whole new thesis, this new ideas, this paper, so to speak, on the science of the godly, of the divine. And then just a few months later, when the Rebbe came back to Lubavitch on the holiday of Shavuos, that's when the Rebbe Rashab began delivering this discourse. Shavuos, the first day of Shavuos, 1912. So that is 112 years ago, because now we are in 2024. So 112 years ago is when this new revelation begins to stream. He continues teaching it. There were some stops in the middle, but mainly, as we mentioned, for 3.5 years. Every week, he's delivering these discourses to the students of the yeshiva. And it was like, wow, it was like on a whole new level. And as mentioned earlier, even when he concluded delivering those discourses, this was still his prize. This was his most precious part of discourse, in which he continued investing himself until 1920, right before Pesach, right before Passover, in April, is when his holy soul left this world. So you would think that this amazing, incredible Hasidic discourse would be printed immediately. Such a thing. It would be copied, it would be printed. Now it's all in manuscript. Hasidim would listen to them, they would write it down when it was given over, but you would think that it would go very quickly to print. It's so precious. Yet, interesting, it did not get printed for many years. Now, at first you can say that the reason they didn't get to print it was because after 1920, right, this was 1917 in Russia, was the Bolshevik Revolution. Afterwards began the very, very dark age for the Jews in Russia, with persecutions and persecutions. And the Hasidim were and the Jewish community and the Hasidic community was fighting a life and death fight to just barely keep Judaism alive and well. So you wouldn't have the ability at that time to be able to pay attention to print, to invest in the printing of this project would be a huge project. It was basically you have to save, you have to bring all of Judaism underground, as everybody knows the story of Chabad's heroism and self-sacrifice during that time. You can understand that during the time from 1920 till 1940, back when Chabad was still in, the previous Rebbe was in Russia until 1927 when he was arrested. And then, so those years of turmoil and difficulty was not possible really to print it. However, the question becomes, what happened after 1940? 1940, the previous Chabad Rebbe relocated from Russia and moved to, no, he left Russia already in 1927, but he went to Latvia. And from Latvia, he moved to Warsaw, to a suburb of Warsaw, to a place called Otvatsk, which is a suburb of Warsaw. And he was there, he held his Hasidic court over there for 10 years. But in 1940, during the onset of the Holocaust, the previous Rebbe managed to escape the burning flames of Europe, and he came to America, established Chabad in America, in Brooklyn, New York. At that time, a year later, his son-in-law came, who was the seventh Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he was assigned the previous Rebbe immediately opened up many institutions to build Judaism in America. One of them was the publication of books. He assigned his second son-in-law, who later was his successor, to be in charge over the book printing. Now, what needs to be said is something really interesting. That up until that time, although the Chabad Rebbes delivered thousands of discourses, but yet very little of it was printed. In the print version, there were only a few books. Most noticeable amongst them was the Tanya. And then you have what we study Thursday night called Likutei Torah and Torah Or. Those two volumes is what we study, the long classes that I give on Thursday night for 3 hours, 2.5 hours, all those. And we've been doing this for the last 25 years. Those discourses, that books was printed already a very long time ago. And there is a book of the Tzemach Tzedek called Derech Mitzvah Secha. There's a few books of the Mittler Rebbe that were printed, Sharei Oira, Imrei Bina, like a few books. The entire Chabad library consisted of maybe one decent-sized bookshelf, but that's about it. Most of the other hundreds and hundreds of manuscripts stayed unprinted. Sadly, many of them got burnt in fires. We don't even have a lot of them. But even that which was there, which is a vast amount of things, remained in manuscripts. Some of them Hasidim knew about, some of them the Hasidim didn't even know about. It was held in the treasures in the libraries of the Rebbes themselves. Okay. But when the Rebbe was appointed, our Rebbe, the seventh Rebbe, was appointed to be in charge of the print, he began pumping out all these books. He took all the manuscripts, obviously with the permission of his father-in-law, who was then still alive. The Rebbe was publishing and publishing and publishing. The Chabad library kept on growing from day to day, an enormous speed. They put out so much, the print was working overtime. And they put out book after book after book. This is the first publication of so many books. Today's days, you can make an entire bookshelf of Chabad books. Big bookshelf, not a small one. And these were all the books, the discourses that were never printed. The reason for that was, on the simple level, to hasten the redemption. Because the redemption is going to come when the teachings of the hidden part of the Torah, especially the teachings of Hasidism, the Baal Shem Tov, will spread across the world. So these secrets must come out to prepare the world for Mashiach. Now we need to understand that these very secrets were forbidden to be taught in the earlier generations. And therefore they were every time someone revealed and took it to a new level of revelation, they put their lives in danger. As we know, that the second generation of Hasidism, the Holy Maggid, the successor of the Baal Shem Tov, was once under a great accusation in heaven for spreading too much, teaching too much. And as a result of that, it was a threat to his life. His student, Reb Shneir Zalman of Liadi, came to the rescue of his Rebbe, of his teacher, by saying a certain story in which he described, basically justified what his master is doing. Basically explaining that when the crown prince life is in danger, in order to save his life, you will even crush and grind the crown jewel, the diamond that's in the king's crown, that's so precious, but because it has a certain mineral that can, for whatever reason, be the healing medicine for the prince. If he's about to die, you have no choice but you have to grind it. And basically, what the Alter Rebbe was then saying, that since the Jewish people are in incredible spiritual danger of assimilation, of them losing their attachment to God because of this long and dark exile, so now there is no choice, but the secrets must come out in order to empower and to strengthen the Jewish soul. As we all know that when we study these secrets, we become much stronger in our spiritual lives. It adds incredible life and vitamins and nutrition to the soul. It's the best thing you can have is a cup of these secrets that we study here in all these classes. It's so invigorating. It's so enlightening. It's so strengthening. So in any case, the Rebbe then, at this point, was printing all the books. There was one exception. This particular long Hemshech, the string of discourses that we are talking about, called Taf Reish Ayin Beis, after the year 5672, the Hebrew year, which was when it began to be delivered. Although the manuscripts were there, the Rebbe did not hand it to be printed. And people were wondering from time to time why. It's such a crown jewel, it should be printed. The chief rabbi of Bnei Barak in Israel is a chassid named Rabbi Landau, Rabbi Yaakov Landau, Olav Hashalom, of blessed memory. In 1946, he sent a letter from Israel to the Rebbe, to our Rebbe. This is still before the Rebbe's Rebbe, 1946. Our Rebbe assumed the leadership in 1950 or 1951, right, with the passing of his predecessor, the previous Rebbe. But in 1946, this rabbi in Israel sends a letter to the Rebbe asking, why are you not printing, if you're printing all the books, why aren't you printing the most prized book of all, this most thorough and most deepest book on Hasidism, why is this not printed? The Rebbe answers and brushes him off, saying it's an enormous expense. It would cost us $10,000. In 1946, Hasidic community did not have the means. And being that there are very few people who are probably going to read it, it's not like a book, a bestseller on the New York Times list. So there's very few people. It's not going to offset the cost of the printing. Therefore, we're not going to print. Now, the Rabbi Yaakov Landau was actually a chassid from the Rebbe Rashab, from the predecessor, from the fifth Rebbe. And he said to the Rebbe in the letter, I heard from my Rebbe, from the Rebbe Rashab, I heard from him that he so much would want this book to get printed. So therefore you should print it. But the Rebbe kind of brushed it off. When Hasidim kept on asking the Rebbe, he would continuously give a similar answer. It's like the cost is too much, and this and that, which was strange, because for everything else, there was no problem with money. The Rebbe always, not that there was money, even without money, he got things done. Where there is a will, there is a way. But for some reason, the Rebbe did not want to touch this book and didn't print it. We don't know why, until an incredible Farbrengen, an incredible talk that the Rebbe gave in 1976. In Yutes Kislev, which comes out usually around November time, Hanukkah, right before Hanukkah, of 1976, 5737, Tafshin Lamed Zayin. During that Farbrengen, you can look it up, towards the end of the discourse. There's two Farbrengens. There's one on Yutes Kislev and on Chav Kislev. This is at the end of on the night of or the end of Chav Kislev, which is part of the celebration of the Alter Rebbe's release from prison. Chabad is a very big day. During that Farbrengen, the Rebbe addressed this matter, and he said that from time to time, the well springs of Hasidism are intensified and comes to the world stronger and stronger and stronger. Part of that project is to print more Hasidic books and manuscripts, and especially to print the longer discourses, because they expand Hasidism and bring the ability to understand Hasidus to a whole new level. And therefore, it's part of the project of adding godly light to the world, which will bring Mashiach. And the Rebbe says, and therefore, the time has come to address the question, what happened with the most prized and most important Hasidic discourse that is in my possession, the Rebbe says. I have the full manuscripts, and yet I haven't printed it yet. And here the Rebbe goes first into an explanation during that talk. Where did he get this manuscript from? How does he have it? He says like this, just beautiful how the Rebbe says it. He says, my father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, had a suitcase. That suitcase he kept, the Rebbe didn't mention all of this information over there, but this is information that we know. That suitcase, he kept his most precious things that were the most important to him in his life. For example, writings of the holy Baal Shem Tov. And the previous Rebbe owned the Siddur, the prayer book of the Baal Shem Tov, founder of Hasidism, which was priceless. Previous Rebbe also owned the other manuscripts from the Baal Shem Tov and the Holy Magid, from Reb Shneur Zalman Oliadi, the Baal Tanya, the Alter Rebbe. Manuscripts from all of his ancestors. Really, really precious stuff he kept in that suitcase. Included in that suitcase was the manuscripts of this entire 5-series book that I have over here, was all in manuscript form, was in that book, written by his father. Now, the previous Rebbe treated this suitcase as the most precious thing in his life. He never left it, never let it out of his sight. When he had to flee during the Holocaust, first of all, during the Holocaust, when he ran from bunker to bunker, the bombings were going on, he always grabbed this suitcase with him. He wouldn't leave it. He always took it with him. When he finally left Poland and managed to flee, most of his library he put into the American embassy in Poland. He had to leave that because he couldn't take it, but this suitcase came with him. The Rebbe, however, says as follows, that in 1929, earlier, this happened in 1940 when the previous Rebbe comes to America, but in 1929, the previous Rebbe went to a trip to America and to Israel. First he went to Israel, then he went to the United States of America the first time, just for a visit. During that trip, he couldn't take the suitcase with him, whatever reason. If he was able to, he would have, but he wasn't able to. So the Rebbe said he had no choice. The Rebbe speaks so beautifully. He says, my father-in-law had no choice but to leave it with me. I guess the Rebbe was the most trusted individual to leave it with. So he left it with me. The Rebbe says, now, the Rebbe says, my curiosity, right? That I was going to poke around, see what's in there. The Rebbe said like this, there is a halachic question. And when someone hands you over something to watch, are you allowed to use it? So the rule is you're not allowed to. If you use something that someone gave you to guard over, it's considered, God forbid, like stealing. You're not allowed to use it. Now, what happens if the person gave you books? And that includes books. If someone gives you books, it tells you, please, I'm traveling, I need you to hold my set of my books over here. That you're not allowed to read those books. However, there's an exception. If you're giving it over to a Torah scholar, if you're giving holy Jewish books over to a Torah scholar, the scholar, to guard it, the scholar is allowed to read it. Why? So the rationale behind it is as follows. We assume that the person knows that if you're giving it to a Torah scholar, he will not be able to control himself. He has such a thirst for Torah, so if you're giving him new books, he'll be so excited, he'll want to read it. And therefore, if if nevertheless he gave it to him, and he didn't tell him specifically, don't look at it, don't use it, we assume that he knew that the guardian was going to look at those books. And therefore, and it's like he gave explicit permission. So that's the reason why, for a Torah scholar, he's allowed to examine the books. So the Rebbe says like this: in my case, it's not important over here whether the recipient, the guardian, was a scholar or not. What's important is that my father-in-law knew about me something that I don't control, that I have like this, so to speak, craze that when it comes to like secrets of the royal secrets, the holy, godly secrets, these things that I will poke around. Right? And they knew so all the years that I'm nosy when it comes to these things. I like to check out all the hidden gems, especially if there's a ksav, the Rebbe calls it a manuscript, that the Hasidim didn't get to see. So of course, I'm going to want to see it. And if my father-in-law gave me the suitcase, it's as if he gave me permission specifically to do it. And he says, in either case, when I received the suitcase, he says, and I saw this manuscript was there, I didn't even go into the whole question, halachically, yes or no. Before I can even get into that whole thing, I immediately went and made copies of the entire manuscript. I don't know how you make copies those days, whatever. But he made copies of the entire thing. So I have my copy. Just so beautiful how the Rebbe relates how he has these copies. And therefore, I have it intact, but yet I didn't publish it. For reasons, for certain reasons. But now I'm feeling guilty, the Rebbe says, similar, that maybe I am withholding the spreading of the wellsprings of Hasidus. It's in my hands. I can publish it. Money is not a problem, he says. You say money to publish? Hasidim have money if they need. For good projects, we're going to have money. So it would be, I can be held responsible for holding back such a godly revelation from the world. But on the other hand, there is a problem publishing it. Now, the Rebbe didn't say explicitly what the problem is, but based on what I said before, it becomes very clear. When you reveal too much light in the world, the person who is doing that can get in trouble. You can actually put your life in jeopardy. The first Chabad Rebbe, I told you the story how he saved his teacher, but the first Chabad Rebbe himself ended up in prison, almost killed, God forbid, chas v'shalom, by the Russians, by the Tsar. He was arrested, and miraculously he came out of the lion's den. And the reason was because he's revealing secrets. He was bringing too much light into the world. Now, being that this manuscript was such a bomb, it's a nuclear bomb, it's a nuclear revelation compared to what we've had before, it seems like the Rebbe was afraid for his own safety. So the Rebbe said, I didn't know what to do. But I came up, suddenly I had this epiphany, I had this idea fell into my mind. Instead of me doing it by myself, let me throw the project into the lap of the Hasidim. Which means we're going to do this all together. I'm not going to take the responsibility myself. We're going to make this a project of the entire Hasidic community. Therefore, the Rebbe says, I am suggesting that everybody who wants to help me out and wants to be part of this project, I don't want money from you, the Rebbe says. I want you to share the responsibility of printing this book. That means it's being printed not by me, it's being printed by us, by all of us together. And in order that it should be serious, not that we're not joking around. You really, really are considered that you are responsible for printing this book. It's like we're all going to do this together. If we get busted, we're all busted together. That's what the Rebbe is saying. So he says, so what we're going to do is, the way it's going to show that everybody is a partner in this, the Rebbe says, is that everybody should give $1, not more, $1 towards the printing. And by giving $1, if you want, you can give $1 for your wife and for every member in your family. Even a little baby that was just born. So like this, it's not going to be me printing it. It's all of us together, and then we're going to be safe. That kind of was what the Rebbe was saying. To add to it, the Rebbe said another very interesting thing. He said, we're also not going to publish any names of the publisher in the book. The book is going to be printed only with the name of the author and the name of his son. Other than that, usually in the books, number one, the people who pay the money for printing usually get a mention, get a shout out. That's called hagdashas. When you write something, special in the book, this was printed with grants given by this person and this person, or you give acknowledgments. You say, "Oh, this was the editing team, and this was the whatever, and we have to acknowledge this one and that one." And they do that in Hasidic books. This book is an exception. The Rebbe says we're not putting anybody's name because it's in order for it. Basically, the Rebbe is saying for the safety of everybody. Even the Rebbe didn't allow his own name to be put there. It should be done. No one's name over there. Nothing. So amazing. It was like such a crazy. It's like people realize that you're dealing with something that's like happening now. Something is breaking through. And after the Rebbe said that, they sang. I'll tell you in a minute what they were singing. And then the Rebbe said that. Oh, and he said that they should give the dollars. They should give it to his secretary, to the maskiras, to the secretaries. There were a few secretaries of the Rebbe. And if you're in another city, in another country, you should give it to the office. These dollars should be given to the offices around the world. And at the Farbrengen itself, the Rebbe said, and being that he took out coins from his pocket, I guess for the value of $1, threw it up, put it into a plate or something, or a napkin, I'm not sure what he put it down on. And he said, being that the project has already begun, because the first $1 has been given already by, and the Rebbe mentioned his name, called himself by his own name, the son of Chana. The Rebbe said his own name, the two names of the Rebbe, right, which is Menachem Mendel. And then the Rebbe said, the son of Chana. The project has already started by the first $1 by so and so. We consider it has begun, and then the Hasidim were actually emptying their pockets and giving dollar bills. They were passing it to the Rebbe, and all these dollars were coming up to the front of the table. Then let me continue, but I'm going to come to a part that I really want that was very personal to me. We're going to get to that in a moment. Then the Rebbe says, then what happened after this Farbrengen? The next day, they sent them. The Rebbe took his copy, manuscript, and sent it to the printing press that it should get ready for typesetting. So in 1976, this is still before, most places weren't using computers yet. So the typesetting went very slow. They sent it to a printer. The typesetter started. That day, the end of the day, the Rebbe came back from the Ohel. Came back from visiting his father-in-law's grave resting place. And the Rebbe then inquired, where are they holding? And he found out they haven't even done one page. The Rebbe said, this is not going to work this way. They took it out from that printer. They sent it to a different printer called Empire Press, run by Chabadniks. They were already using computers. Obviously, the computers that were there in 1977 or 70, this wasn't too advanced, but yet, they were able to get the job done much faster. Within 2.5 months, the entire project was done. There were 12 boys from 770 that were over a dozen boys that were involved. They were a bunch of people working, and they were working 6 days a week, almost 24 hours a day. It was like, no, they were printing and printing and printing. It was going, they took off every project, and this was the project that was there from Kislev. So yeah, Tevis, Shvat, they're in less than 2.5 months. It was all, in those days, this is considered enormously fast. The first books were printed. That's the story. Now, what really was interesting for me, let me tell you my story with the book and what I really felt was phenomenal. So within the last 2 weeks, I suddenly had this urge to teach this book. I don't know why. I'll tell you how it came about to me. Because I was teaching in one of the Rebbe's talks about the days of Mashiach, how our minds are going to be completely immersed in godliness. And therefore, today's days as well, we should immerse our minds completely in godliness. So I was thinking like, I should study something that will keep me immersed in godliness all day. I should like really be thinking about this. Like, what can I teach? What can I learn for myself? So first I decided I'm going to learn this on my own. But then I realized that if I take some upon myself to learn something on my own, it'll probably last for 2 months. I'll get busy with stuff. It'll fizzle out. But if I make a commitment online and I do this for hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people following, I won't have a choice but to show up every day because people are waiting. Our students are waiting. So that's why I decided to make this, to do this, to start teaching this as kind of part of my preparation for Mashiach. That's what the Rebbe said, we have to be preparing for Mashiach these days. But what super and made it even more crazy was that I'm thinking like, suddenly I had this like push to teach this. So if you remember, you can go back to a class that I gave 2 weeks ago. After President Raisi from Iran, may his name be blotted out, the wicked monster, when he was killed, it was a helicopter crash, I gave a whole talk called The God of Israel. You can listen to it on YouTube. The God of Israel is alive and well. Yes, the God of Israel is alive and well. In that talk, I was talking about the event, the date, the time, all the parts of it. And one of the things I was talking about was that we are now witnessing the war of the crown of holiness fighting the crown of the wicked. The two crowns are like horns of two animals. You ever see animals like deer or moose or elk, when usually during mating season, they go crazy and they fight and they clash with their horns. It's something to see. So we're watching now the final battle go down. The horns of holiness are locked in a massive fight with the horns of the unholy. The keter of holiness versus the keter of klipa. And I was connecting it to the fact that the day that Raisi's helicopter was smashed into the mountain and he was killed was the 11th day of Iyar, of the month of Iyar. And I was connecting it to the number 11, which 11 is the number of the crown, because 10 is the sphirot, and the 11th is the above. And I was quoting a verse, V'chol karnei rishayim agadeya. The verse is in verse number 11, chapter 75 in Psalms. It says, God says that the crown of the unholy I will cut down, Troimamno karnei sadik. It will raise the horns of the holy. When the horns of the wicked will be broken, and I was comparing the helicopter as like horns on the top, when that shattered, and Raisi, this rabid anti-Semite who was bent on using nuclear weapons to destroy the Jewish people, and already did, responsible for October 7th, and also he attacked Israel with 350 missiles. And miraculously, we were saved. So this was his destruction, was an enormous elimination of the forces of evil from the world prior to Mashiach. And therefore, I was saying, I don't even know where this came to me, but these were the thoughts that came to me, and I shared it on YouTube. Tremamno karnei tzaddik, now the horns of the tzaddik, which means the horns of Mashiach, because by Mashiach it also says his horns. It says v'karnoi tarim, let the horns of Mashiach be rise. This is what I was talking about, and I spoke about it very strongly on Monday, but I spoke about it much stronger in my shul on Shabbos. It's not recorded. Very powerful talk. Now, when I researched, after I committed to this, teaching this book, I researched the story. I didn't know at the time this whole story about this book. I did some research on it. The reason I researched it, first of all, I was curious, but mainly because I sent out an article. I sent out a notice to all my followers on WhatsApp that I'm starting a new podcast, and I wanted the people to know what the podcast is about. So I found an article online that was published in a magazine many years ago, and I shared it. I didn't even read it. When the time I shared it, I didn't read it. Then that night, I went a week ago on Monday. I sat Tuesday night, I think it was. I I opened up the article and I read it. The article that I'm basically, most of the information I shared with you comes from that article. So I read it, and then I got to this part. By the end of this Farbrengen, the Rebbe sang a song right after, and the Rebbe said they should sing which song? Tremamno karnoi tzaddik. Let the horns of the tzaddik rise. Which I understood when I read it was that the publishing of Ayin Beis of this particular discourse is the revelation of the horns of Mashiach. This is the teachings. This is the ultimate. And it's interesting, if those who are following the podcast will see that the first discourse is talking all about Keser, about the crown. So we're talking about the crown. The crown is symbolized by the horns. It's the horns of godliness being revealed. So I felt like God is giving me a thumbs up that after Raisi was killed, certain klippas, certain darknesses were broken in the world. And it's time now to share to everybody. Because online, this is not just for Hasidim. It's for all the Jewish people, not just for Jews. Non-Jews can also join and listen. So to have such revelation that we're able to share it and learn it together, I pray every day that God should open my mind. I should even understand it. I never went and studied the entire book. I only barely scratched the surface. But I feel like with the merit of all the people that we'll be studying with, Hashem should give me the brains and the mind and the opening of my own mind to be able to understand the concepts and be able to share it and give it over. And through that, increase divine revelation in the world and hopefully make Mashiach just a bit closer and let it be already right now. Thank you. And please, if you're able to join our podcast, I upload it almost every day. It's called the Elokus podcast. I'll see to it to add it to the YouTube bottom, the link to it. You can listen to it on Spotify, on Apple, I don't know what the Apple Apple podcast is, or the various different podcasts it should be on, and it will also be posted over here on YouTube. Meanwhile, let us merit to see and have the ultimate redemption now. And if you're signing up, it's a good merit for long life, because it's probably going to take us 30 years to finish. So we're going to, everybody, we are actually, and if you're, if you have it, you can say to Hashem, listen here, I want to be in this world until I can finish this discourse. So it will be good on that level as well. And hopefully we will already enter into the time that we will all live forever. Bezrat Hashem. And Mashiach will teach us new Torah. But whatever we learned in Ayin Beis will for sure be very helpful for us to understand the deeper, even more advanced Torah that is going to be revealed through Mashiach, Bezrat Hashem, very soon.